at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. So one of the things that I'm sure everyone has seen the picture of the woman who was riding down the road with the presidential caravan going right on by, and she sends the one finger salute. She tells him, "You're number one there, Mr. President. We're flying the flag, flipping the bird, whatever word you want to use for it." She was fired from her job. And again, this is one of those moments. And the day it happened, I said, this is the reason people need labor unions. This is the reason people need contracts. Every CEO's got a contract. Everybody knows, what you can be fired for. This woman had no idea. None whatsoever that, this picture could go viral and end up on her social media page. And, well, she's out of a job. I guess a decent person decided that they were going to put up a GoFundMe account that has raised almost $100,000 for this woman. And I suggest if you got a couple extra bucks, just as a matter of protest, throw her a couple of bucks, this Julie Briskman, who, look, she worked for a federal contractor who, I was looking at their website and they basically do anything for money. There used to be a name for that, but now we call them federal contractors. And, their thing is, well, you know what, we can't have, lewd comments and we can't have this stuff. So you're done. And she had no recourse. And over the last couple of days, I've had conversations with people, well, they can't do that. I've got the freedom of speech. And you go, no. And a little bit later on in the hour, we're going to talk to Paul Segunda about this. And, this idea that, while we may have free speech rights, it doesn't extend into the shop. It doesn't extend into work. The whole free speech thing is between you and your government. And while she has the right to flip off the president or say whatever she wants, the reality is, in this country right now, no rights on the job. And as I keep saying, you need to be pushing back against this whole thing. Anyway, so you remember yesterday we talked a little bit about the guy Trump nominated to the federal bench in Alabama, who was only like the third person since like 1989 to receive an unqualified rating from the American Bar Association. And it just, I guess, happens to be married to a woman who is Trump's person who makes the judicial recommendations. Seems a whole lot of cozy and incestuous and a lot of patronage there. Well, today is fun too. Every day seems to be a new person that the Trump administration is bringing on that you go, oh boy, so grateful for them, so grateful for their service. What now we're seeing is a guy named Stephen Bradbury. He's going to be the general counsel for the Department of Transportation. In fact, the senators already approved him today in a 50-47 vote. That would be along party lines. And you go, well, who's Stephen Bradbury? Well, if you go back to the W years, you may remember the Justice Department back then, trying to justify torture. He was the head of the Justice Department's legal counsel office back during the Bush years. He was one of the architects of the torture memos, giving us the justification to use. I know, Rick, it's not torture. It's enhanced interrogations. We were just enhancing interrogation techniques. That's all. So, immediately I'm going, okay, so the guy who wrote the torture memo is now going to be the top legal guy at the Department of Transportation. Is he going to write a memo on, maybe torturing people who run through stop signs? Are truck drivers going to be, tortured, pulled off the side of the road going, did you cheat on your logbook? Oh, did you? I mean, is this coming? Now, there are some Democrats who are going, well, the torture memo, that's one thing. But the reality is, as chief legal counsel for the Department of Transportation, his work as, one of the attorneys for Takata Corporation, and you go, Takata, I've heard that before. Well, Takata is the company that you may remember all the defective airbags. In fact, it was the largest auto recall in the history of the country. You may remember a little something about that. Yeah, that's him. He was legal counsel for this Japanese auto parts company. Now, understand, again, you come back to, oh my gosh, this would be in his wheelhouse. So the next Japanese auto parts company like Takata, or the next, Chinese company or American company for that matter, who comes out with a crap product that should be recalled, he's going to be at the Department of Transportation. He's going to be the guy in that oversight world. It's going to be his part of his call. And maybe what he'll do is instead of having a recall, maybe he'll just write a torture memo on the people who were harmed. So if the brakes fail, maybe they'll torture you to say, no, it was your fault. It wasn't the brakes. I don't know. This is how screwy and how crazy this whole setup has been under Trump. And every day it seems like there's another person who's horribly unqualified or horribly compromised. But again, this isn't what the swamp draining was supposed to be all about. And as we said from the beginning, not so much about draining the swamp as creating larger monsters and uglier ones. That, my friends, is exactly what we're doing. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Jeffy, test of lying. We're going to have Sarah Kendzior here to talk about the big hearing today. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1938. That was the day that the National Federation of Telephone Workers was founded in New Orleans, Louisiana. Today, the union is known as the Communication Workers of America and represents 700,000 workers in a wide range of communication fields. Attempts to organize the telephone industry began as early as 1910 by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. By the end of the decade, the IBEW had more than 200 telephone unions. Growth in the number of union members in the telephone industry was greatly impeded due to World War I. During the war, President Woodrow Wilson issued an order to, quote, hereby take possession and assume control and supervision of each and every telegraph and telephone system, and every part thereof within the jurisdiction of the United States. He placed control of the industry under the authority of the Postmaster General. After the war ended, telephone companies increasingly installed company unions as a way to control their workers' organizing efforts. Their aim was to stave off unionism from outside organizations. Nearly all of the IBEW locals lost their membership to company unions. Congress passed the Wagner Act in 1935, a new surge of independent unionism began in the telephone industry. In 1938, 31 organizations joined together in New Orleans to form the National Federation of Telephone Workers. It was a loose association of locally independent unions. But by 1947, it became clear that the union would have to form a strong national presence to negotiate with the nationwide companies. And the Communication Workers of America was born. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Yes, little Jeffy. 5 hours of fun, entertainment, and, test-a-lying. I got to be honest. The premise, and this is one of those things that just kind of leaves me chuckling. I guess what I took away from the hearing was, like I said, about kind of like Bill Clinton. I didn't have sex with that woman. Only this is, I didn't have any relations with those people with Russians, except the people I had contact with who were in contact with the Russians. But I was against them. I mean, it's just mind-blowingly nuts. And here to give us her thoughts on the big test-a-lying today, I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, what did you think? All of the hype, was it all worth it? Was today the day?
Honestly, I can't recall. I just can't recall. Sorry. No, I've been trying to block this out of my mind. I mean, it was a horror show. It was 5 hours long. He committed perjury in my mind. He committed perjury about his past commitments of perjury. He denied things that were true. He was fairly racist in his responses to a lot of the black representatives. I mean, it was a mess. It revealed a lot about him, and not so much in terms of the information that he was trying to confer.
Yeah, I got to be honest. As I was watching some of it, I was going, he deserves every bit of this. This is like well, karma.
Yeah, I mean,
you
he
deserve
deserves
this.
way worse than this. He hasn't been punished for anything he's done. I mean, I was thinking about this as I was watching it today, that he's had multiple hearings in which it's become clear that he's lying under oath, that he's violated protocol in a major way in terms of things like not filling out his security forms. He helped Trump commit obstruction of justice. He recused himself but didn't honor the recusal, and absolutely nothing has happened to him. The worst thing that's happened to Jeff Sessions is that a black congressman or congresswoman interrupted him and freaked him out. That's pretty much it. And he should be out of office. He should be, stripped of his clearance, and he should be under serious investigation. And it's very frustrating that so many months into this administration, he's still just sitting there being Bilbo Bigot.
Yeah,
So,
I was watching, Representative Jeffries, go after him. And look, he's gotten a lot of play on this, but he makes a really interesting point. Look, you went after a cop you went after somebody who didn't initially come out and tell the truth, then did correct his testimony. You went after him. You ruined his life, and yet here you sit multiple times doing the same thing, expecting nothing to happen to you.
Yes, exactly. I thought, Jeffries was great. He brought up the point, too, that Sessions had supported Bill Clinton's impeachment on the ground of perjury. So perjury, theoretically, is something that Jeff Sessions takes seriously, but not seriously enough when it comes to committing it himself. And, it's really on Congress and once again, unfortunately, on the GOP to act and hold officials like him accountable that keep breaking the laws that they're supposed to be upholding for the entire country.
Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things where I'm watching it going, really? And the thing that also got me is, there was a mass shooting today, and yet most people didn't even know there was a mass shooting today.
Yeah, no, that's true. There was that. There's also the hearing about Trump and nukes, which I haven't caught up with. And, with the mass shooting, I think there's just, this has just been a really painful couple of months. We've had a number of horrific shootings, and I don't think it's a matter of people not caring that there's a mass shooting. I think that there's sort of an inability to process and a kind of desire to not want to look, to not even want to see the headline. And there's also conflicting information about that particular one, about whether or not children were killed. I actually haven't managed to find an up-to-date accurate article on this. I haven't posted on it, but yeah, it's horrible. Whatever happened, it's horrible.
No, but here we are. All of this testimony, all of this stuff. I guess the question I come back to is, by having him so much on the record, because you've had some former prosecutors saying, look, he's basically, to use a horrible analogy, basically the noose is tightening. The more he talks, the deeper he's getting himself in and getting everybody else in.
Oh yeah, he's incriminating himself, and what worries me is that he's very blasé about that process. I don't think he's a stupid guy. I think he's actually very smart, and he's smart enough to play dumb throughout all these hearings and to know that he's lying and to know that, his deception is very transparent. And I think that, the way he behaves indicates that he thinks he's going to get away with it. And because he is the highest ranking legal official in the United States, I mean, that's a pretty good way to get away with it. And he's also, in certain respects, Trump's most loyal lackey that's not related to him. He was there from the start. He was the first senator to endorse Trump all the way back in August of 2015 when, very few people thought Trump would become president. And he's been with him ever since, through the campaign, through the administration, as all these other officials, got fired or resigned in some dramatic fashion. He was just there the whole time, very quiet. And that means he knows a lot. He's potentially a great witness if he weren't pathologically lying about everything. And so, therein lies the problem.
Yeah. No, like they say, when there's a nuclear fallout, the cockroaches will survive. But I look at, some of the conversation he had with Representative Jordan. And there are some people saying, Jeffy's not going to go after Hillary. Are you as concerned as I am that this administration is so hell-bent on going after and in a very Machiavellian way after someone that they quote unquote beat in the last election?
Oh, they definitely want to go after her. I mean, they made that clear for the last, I don't know, about a month. They've set this narrative forward that Hillary is the real conspirator in the Russian saga. Hillary is the guilty party. And I think that came from them, knowing that they could no longer deny that Russian interference occurred. They can't do this whole, I don't know any Russians. I've never been involved with Russia. No one's buying that anymore. So they have to find somebody who is involved with Russia because there is an investigation. And so they've made it Hillary. And in terms of Sessions' reactions today, I think he was kind of pissed that these, Tea Party morons were, goading him into saying, yes, there's going to be an investigation of Hillary Clinton, when he knows this investigation is on, very spurious, probably baseless grounds. And for him to say under oath that he's going to pursue it could potentially lead to problems in pursuing it in the future. So I think Sessions just wanted to play it cool, but these, a lot of the Republicans in particular were very gung-ho about this prospect and kept egging him on. But yeah, I think if it's not done through Sessions, they will figure out some way to try to flip this narrative and pin everything on the Democrats.
Yeah, well, you need a distraction, and that's, Hillary's the Clintons are still a good distraction. And look, I'm not a huge Bill Clinton fan, but, it's still a good distraction.
Oh, yeah, and it's a campaign promise, and he hasn't been able to deliver on anything. There's no, repeal of Obamacare. There's no wall, and so we're left with lock her up. And so I think, that's still a very attractive premise to a lot of his base, and, it has a little bit of crossover appeal with kind of the horseshoe theory of left and right, and and it gets attention. It diverts attention away from genuine problems that this administration is causing. So of course they're going to go that path. It's a winner every time to try to go after Hillary Clinton for them.
Well, because the base it's like a drug that makes the base dumb.
Oh yeah, and it makes them feel satisfied. It's like, okay, this is what we wanted. This is kind of what we came here for, and it'll people like a witch hunt. It'll take their minds off some things. Although I think that conditions are degrading so rapidly. I mean, I think we're, as you mentioned, we're traumatized from all of these horrible events recently, from the shootings and the sexual assault allegations and, just the general instability and chaos of what's happening here and in the world, that I'm not sure that, a Clinton scandal will manage to satiate the public. I just feel like things are kind of breaking, and it's hard to see what's coming down the road.
Yeah, were you surprised that Sessions came out and said that he didn't doubt any of the women that came forward in the Roy Moore stuff?
I was a little bit surprised. I didn't think that he would necessarily say he didn't believe them, but I thought he would just say he wouldn't be able to answer, or it hasn't gone between a court of law. So that was interesting. I mean, we have seen a GOP shift in terms of believing the women, and I think the new allegations that Moore is so disgusting that he got kicked out of the mall. And you know what it took to get kicked out of a mall in the 80s. I mean, you really had to be like something extra gross. And so I think that kind of, made people realize this is a really egregious case of sexual harassment, sexual assault. This man is just absolutely monstrous. And so I think that they don't want to be associated with him. And, sometimes I wonder if there's a little more to it because of these rumors that Sessions may be put back into play in Alabama in Moore's position if Moore were to drop out, which, of course, would then cause this whole chain of events with the Mueller investigation and, Sessions no longer being there, no longer being recused from it. Like, I don't know whether really that's their plan, per se. I don't think they planned to have Roy Moore revealed as a serial child molester. But yeah, it did make me kind of wonder what he was basing that on. He doesn't seem to have much of a conscience.
Yeah, but in Roy Moore's defense, he never molested any children without the mother's consent.
Oh yeah, that's great. Like, I don't even know what to say. It's just I'm laughing because I don't want to cry. I mean, it's so vile.
How screwy are things when that's your defense? And the thing I talked about yesterday, and I'm still trying to get my head around it. If there was this much, if he got banned from a freaking mall in the 80s, how is it now? After all of the stuff that he's been in, all of the years of being thrown out of the Supreme Court and all of this culture warrior stuff, how is it only now that this stuff comes to light? Because I got to think Jeffy and the rest of them, it's the open secret that everybody had to know.
It certainly seems like they knew. I mean, everyone who went to the mall knew, and, plenty of people from that high school class or who worked with him in numerous capacities seem to know. And so it's really amazing that he managed to retain, his position for so long, and that he had the gall to run for Senate, where that you're going to be scrutinized on a higher level than before. And, I think in some respects it's because of social media, because women are able to get their stories out and reach each other, and those stories can spread, and they realize they're not alone, they're not the sole victim. And, that can happen. That's always happened, that women realize that, but it used to take a lot longer. And so there's this kind of acceleration. We're seeing it not just in Moore's case, but, in all the Hollywood cases and in other industries as well, which is, on one hand, it's very, I think there's a sense of validation of women finally being believed, but it's also extremely traumatizing for a lot of women, and it's just an upsetting thing to see how pervasive sexual assault is and how long people get away with it.
Yeah, well, the good thing is today in Congress they're going to have training. They've passed a thing. No more. There's going to be training, sensitivity training. There'll be no more sexual harassment after today.
I hear that. I just want to hit something. It's just so frustrating to have a president who, has been accused of basically of the same thing as Moore, of, molesting teenage girls, of raping teenage girls. And his divorce, his first divorce against Ivana, she accused him of raping her. He was peeping in on teenage girls in their locker rooms. He bragged about sexual assault, in his own words. And so we know that these aren't, things that just come from, secondhand sources. Some of the worst stuff we know about Trump and sexual assault came straight from Trump or from people, immediately connected with him who went on record like Ivana does. And it's like, that's the president? I mean, you got to start from the top. If you're going to take Roy Moore seriously and distance yourself from him, then obviously the same standard needs to apply to Trump. But they're just not doing it. They briefly had, a couple weeks of conscience in October 2016 and then abandoned it entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And what's interesting is how long it's taken for the Republicans to come out against Moore. I know McConnell was one of the first ones, and now it's kind of like a slow, pulling teeth to get them to go, no, maybe we don't want him in the Senate.
Yeah, and he's a child molester, and they still have to be convinced. I mean, it's just the bar, it is so low. I don't know what else he could have done. Maybe murdered somebody. I mean, maybe that would have, I don't know whether they would have dropped him even then. I mean, it's a real problem in the GOP. You know, they're digging deeper and deeper. Like, they are the swamp. You know, Trump is the swamp thing, and he's pulled them all into this morass. And not like they were great before, but I think their standards have just bottomed out, and Roy Moore is evidence of that.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, again, I keep coming back to this moment of, you know, how despicable this guy is, and how, you know, I was looking at one of the guys, this David Horowitz. I don't know if you know him or not, but he was saying that.
Yeah,
you know,
I know about him.
Well, yeah, you know, sure, he's a child molester, sure, you know, but at least he's not a Democrat.
Oh God. I mean, it's like, what the hell is wrong with you people? Like, you're absolutely nuts, you know. And there's Twitter posts saying the same things. I'm not sure about the validity of the person who said it, whether it was like a troll or an actual human being. But I know David Horowitz is real, and he just does, you know, many horrible perspectives on many horrible things. But that level of partisanship is just, it's abnormal. I mean, it's like you've built up this, you know, incredible image of what the Democrats are, that, you know, child molesters, pedophiles are somehow superior, and then you brag about it with the expectation that that kind of statement will be applauded or viewed as tolerable or normal. And I hope that the majority of Americans, when they hear Horowitz or other people saying things like that, you know, find it revolting, you know, on behalf of the women who Moore assaulted. And, you know, that has nothing to do with partisanship. You know, one of the women who came forward voted for Trump. And, you know, this doesn't have to do with politics. This has to do with women being violated and us needing to respect and believe the victims and to support them. And that should be clear cut for everyone, but apparently it's not.
Yeah, no, especially in Alabama, where look, I've talked to some people who said, look, you know, Mary was a teenage virgin, Joseph was an old man. You know, it's biblical, it's the Bible. You know, and Roy Moore is a good
that's
Christian.
Another thing. I mean, what Bible is this? Like, you know, I'm not, you know, super like theologian, but, you know, Mary was a virgin. Like, that's kind of key to the whole thing. Like, this was not about, you know, Joseph hitting on Mary at the mall. Like, this is just so, like, I don't even know how you get this sort of like Christ-like image of pedophile Roy Moore. Like, oh my Lord. It's absolutely crazy.
It is crazy, and you're absolutely right. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on the Donald Trump's trip overseas and his meetings with the real authoritarian strongmen and the guy from China, Russia, and of course the Philippines. I want to get some of your thoughts on that.
You know, I've been paying some attention to that. I was honestly diverted somewhat by the, you know, domestic chaos, but, you know, I've always thought it was disgusting that, you know, he's expressed admiration for Duterte in the Philippines in particular. You know, he's applauded these death squads. He's applauded this extremely brutal, you know, policy towards drug addicts. And, you know, you kind of see that mirrored in Trump's own words, where he's just like, you know, you could just not take them. Like, he doesn't seem to understand addiction is a disease. He's absolutely willing to cut off people's health care. And he has this very sadistic, you know, attitude towards anyone who shows any sign of weakness. You know, he wants to punish them further. And I think that that's what makes somebody like Duterte, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, attractive to him. And, you know, that's true of all dictators. He likes that. He likes to see, you know, men who are abusing the population do it freely. I think he's got a genuine sadistic streak that doesn't necessarily have to do with an ideology. And he shares that quality, unfortunately, with rulers of other nations.
Now, are you as sad as I am that he's back? I mean, I was kind of happy. I was hoping someone would keep him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting for the big announcement. I don't think that's happening. He said he had something special to say. And, you know, the problem here is with Trump, it can be anything from, like, his golf game improved to we're dropping a nuke on North Korea. And, like, you just don't know, like, what it's going to be. And so I have the usual existential dread that I've had since he entered the race, only it's amped up a little bit. You know, and he treats us all like a reality TV thing, and, you know, we're the captive audience, and so I guess we'll find out the big news tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll see what. And look, I'm going to get up extra early for the Twitter storm that may come.
Oh God, yeah, that's great. Jet lagged Trump on a Twitter storm. Yeah.
There you go, Sarah. I appreciate the time and your thoughts. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Always great talking with you, Sarah Kendzior. Again, you want to check out some of her stuff, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Great stuff. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
It's Tuesday, November 14, 2017.
The world is moving on, and so is the United States.
At UN climate talks in Bonn, Germany, the U.S. is a bit schizophrenic. New report shows Paris Agreement targets are not nearly enough. Senate approves fossil fuel lobbyist for top EPA air pollution position. Plus, Puerto Rico's governor estimates damages after Hurricane Maria are $95 billion.
All of those damages and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
So, what will make strong hurricanes more and more frequent? According to our government, the answer is none of your f***ing business. Stop asking so many questions.
Agreed. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen. Well, after a main power line went out in Puerto Rico late last week, dropping the island from 40% power capacity back down to 18%, that has now been fixed. And now, 7 weeks after Hurricane Maria made landfall, still 50% of the island is without power.
Yes, the recovery is going extremely slowly, and Puerto Rican Governor Ricardo Rosselló on Monday estimated that rebuilding the island after 2 back-to-back hurricanes, both Irma and Maria, will cost $95 billion. That's an amount roughly equal to the island's entire annual gross domestic product. Rosselló asked Congress to cover the costs of the reconstruction price tag as, quote, an important step to demonstrate that the federal government will treat Puerto Ricans like any other American citizens.
Oh, sure. The federal government giving $95 billion to Puerto Rico. Good luck with that, Puerto Rico.
Meanwhile, in Texas, which is now rebuilding from Hurricane Harvey, a new MIT study calculates that climate change made Hurricane Harvey about 6 times more likely, and that the state's annual risk of similar extreme rainfall events in any given year is now 18% higher thanks to global warming.
Thanks, global warming.
Meanwhile, in the U.S. Senate, the majority Republicans voted strictly along party lines to confirm fossil fuel industry lawyer and lobbyist William Wareham for the number 2 spot at the EPA. Wareham has spent his...
Let me just break in there. That's the fossil fuel lobbyist who now is the number 2 guy at the Environmental Protection Agency.
That's right.
Got it.
Wareham has spent his career suing the EPA to roll back clean air standards that restrict mercury, silica, lead, and smog.
And we call that regulatory capture, do we not?
Yes, we do.
Well done, fossil fuel industry.
At the United Nations climate talks now underway in Bonn, Germany, international negotiators are hammering out the mechanisms for 195 nations to reduce their emissions under the landmark Paris Climate Agreement. But a new report from the United Nations Environment Program calculates that the current national commitments under that agreement are only about 1/3 of the reductions needed to avoid shooting past the agreed-upon target of no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. However, the report also concludes that accelerating the transition to solar and wind energy, replanting forests, and increasing the energy efficiency of our cars and buildings can help close that gap.
That sounds like a great idea. I suspect everyone in the world except the U.S. will be interested.
Well, last week, the United States became the only nation on the planet not included in that agreement. That's thanks to President Trump's intention to withdraw from the Paris Agreement in 2020. But a Trump administration delegation is attending the Bonn climate talks anyway.
And I hope they're being met with boos and hisses.
Yeah, pretty much. On Monday, they hosted an event to promote so-called U.S. clean coal and nuclear energy technology to developing countries as a way to cut their emissions. And, of course, they were interrupted by a climate action youth protest.
So you claim to be an American, but we see right through your greed. It's killing all across the world for that coal mining, and we proudly stand up.
And a shadow delegation is also representing the U.S. in Bonn, a coalition of states, cities, and businesses seeking to highlight positive U.S. climate efforts and strike their own deals on the subnational level.
Are they better singers?
I hope so. But their schizophrenic parallel U.S. presence is creating some confusion for other countries, according to the New York Times, who aren't quite sure who.
I turn to Paul Segunda, professor of law and the director of labor and employment law program there at Marquette University. Paul, thanks for taking time for us.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Rick.
So I look at this photograph. I look at this woman riding her bike, telling the president and the motorcade what she thinks of them, only to have her employer fire her for exercising what I think is her free speech right to, tell her government what she thinks.
And what's interesting is, unlike, where people are always told in the workplace, if you work in the private sector, in the workplace, you have no First Amendment free speech rights because the First Amendment protects you from government action.
Right.
So only if you're a public employee do you have First Amendment rights. But what makes this really unsettling is this woman wasn't at work. She was riding her bike recreationally and happened to be where the presidential motorcade was. And she was literally a citizen expressing her opinion silently, peacefully. And because it became a viral picture, she ended up being found out by her employer. And her employer said, well, we're a federal contractor. We can't afford to employ you anymore. And she lost her job, which I think struck a lot of us as horribly unfair.
Well, I mean, unfair, yes, but, there are so many of us believe that we have a First Amendment right to, and we have the right to exercise and redress our government of grievances and all of this stuff, only to find out that, you could be fired for anything. And this is something that you and I have talked about over the years, this idea of at-will employment. So legally, there doesn't seem to be any recourse for this woman because, it's an at-will state.
Yeah, and in fact, Rick, we've talked about this. 49 states and the District of Columbia are at-will states. The only non-at-will state is Montana. So if you're from Montana and you're listening, then this doesn't apply to you. But everyone else who's listening, at-will means you can be fired for good reason, bad reason, no reason at all. And even though we may disagree with this employer, we'll file this under a bad reason, it doesn't matter. There is no legal recourse. And of course, this is something that people always forget about unions, Rick. We talk about the importance of having voice in the workplace, being able to express your concerns or how the business can be made better or just how to be treated fairly. But one thing that is often overlooked, but might be even more important than the higher wages and higher benefits that come with union membership, is the fact that almost every single union collective bargaining agreement has what is called a just cause provision, which means you can only be terminated for a good reason.
Right.
The employer can't fire you at a whim or because of a controversial or provocative reason. They have to come forward with actual proof that you haven't met a company expectation or a reasonable requirement of the job. It's just not what you need to do in employment at will. So again, just to restate this, for people who are listening, there is a huge difference between being employed at will, which is what, 88% of our country is employed at right now, versus being under a union contract, whether public or private employment, where you have just cause protection and the employer has to give a good reason before they take an adverse employment action against you.
And not just cause to fire you, also due process, where there is a process by which they have to go to fire you.
And what we talk about always is these ideas of industrial due process and industrial equal protection. Industrial due process means that you have a right to have your side of the story told and some form of a hearing, an opportunity to basically have a deliberate decision and not just be fired on a whim instantaneously. As far as industrial equal protection, well, if this has happened before in the workplace, you should be treated equivalently with everyone else who has been in a similar situation. It shouldn't just be a knee-jerk reaction that the employer, because of their particular interests outside of the workplace, are, sensitive to.
Yeah, but here again, you look at this and you go back to that frame between an employee without a contract and employees with contracts, and I look at the NFL. You have a lot of employees in the NFL who have said that they're going to in a silent way do the same kind of protest. Only they're doing it on the job, and most of them outside of Colin Kaepernick have had protections.
Correct. And by the way, remember, there's an essential difference between the NBA's collective bargaining contract and the NFL's. The NBA's contract, it was bargained by the union, and we may or may disagree with this, that people who are basketball players have to stand for the anthem. But not so in the NFL. There's nothing in the current NFL agreement that requires players to stand. And again, reasonable people, Rick, can disagree over this. But the point of the matter is it shouldn't be something that is unilaterally imposed on you. Your union, as your representative, should have the right to bargain over it. And depending on how important it is to that group of employees, you may or may not want to fight over it, depending on what else you care about in the workplace as far as terms and conditions.
Now, I look at this, and again, I've had a number of conversations about this over the last week and a half with folks who are saying, well, this is dead wrong, and there should be a law.
Yeah, there should be.
Because, so many people think that they're protected, and I get this a lot because I think people don't understand the whole First Amendment freedom of speech thing.
It's one of the most known misperceptions about employment law is this idea that I have the same free speech rights within the workplace that I have as I'm walking around in my everyday life. No, you don't. There are no First Amendment rights in the private sector workplace. There are some First Amendment rights in the public sector workplace, but only about 15% of Americans are employed in the public sector. So for the other 85%, there is a common misperception that you have free speech rights. I had a colleague who a number of years ago went around the country and asked people, do you think your employer can fire you if they disagree with what you say? And most people, not surprisingly, I think it was like 80%, said, no, I have a right to say what I want to. That's my First Amendment right. Again, legally, that is not the current law.
Yeah.
The current law is the First Amendment does not apply in the private sector, and you are employed at will, which means, again, you can be fired for good reason, bad reason, no reason at all. It gives the employer tremendous power over an individual employee.
Yeah. But here's the thing, and this is a little bit differently. I mean, this is the new world in which we're beginning to live in, because she wasn't at work. She was nowhere attached to work. It was posted on social media, and, so it begs to ask the question, in the new world that we live in with social media, apparently, if you tweet something out your boss doesn't like, you post something on Facebook your boss doesn't like, there's the door. So, I mean, we're talking some kind of major censorship, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that what happens and what the employer said here was, we're a federal contractor. We do a lot of our business with the federal government. We've gotten a lot of bad press over this. If bad means that we've offended the current administration, and we just can't afford to keep you hired here anymore. And again, that sounds like a really bad reason, but it's not an illegal reason. And so, as you've pointed out before, what we really need is something to protect employees who are in this situation. Now, I'll be honest with you. There doesn't need to be a law. There is a law. It's called the National Labor Relations Act. Employees should be angry about this. They should be looking for ways to organize and protect themselves through collectivization. That is, working together to improve their work conditions. There is a law, but unfortunately, because I think the game is stacked against employees, as far as how the labor law has been interpreted recently in favor of employers, it's very hard, as you know, Rick, for employees who want to join a union to actually do so.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of this, you're right. We've got the law. It's just it's been so badly, I like the term ossification of our labor law over just years and years of just being whittled down and attacked and amended in ways that the pendulum has swung way too far to the side of employers. It is a struggle. But here's the thing. I look at this moment and I look at this image and I look at this woman being fired as one of these things that everybody, regardless of your political ideology, which regardless of you like Donald Trump or you don't, I think universally people want to be able to have their say in a free country without the kind of terrorism that would come from being fired. And I use that word on purpose because, look, if you can't in your own home have the ability to say what you want and do what you want, that's a situation, in my view, of some bit of terrorism.
There's two types of freedom, I think, involved here. There's the freedom to express yourself outside the workplace, absolutely, but there's also a freedom from. And the freedom here is from employer interference. That is, you should have a right to privacy, a right to autonomy when you're no longer at work. Let me tell you something interesting, Rick. In other countries, in France, in Germany, they recognize a new right in this world of social media that we live in called the right to disconnect. That means that after you leave work, your employer has no right to track you down by email, by text, on social media, and you are free to do as you want, unmolested by your employer's interests. I think such a law would be something that would work very well in this country, and it's just a matter of convincing people to elect representatives who understand that they're sick and tired of having their private lives interfered with by their employers.
Yeah. And the potential of their families being completely upended. And you look at this woman, fired, without notice, without recourse, because there's no recourse, is there?
No, there's no severance. There is no notice. She is basically going to also probably have to fight for unemployment because if you are fired, they say for willful misconduct under most state unemployment compensation laws, and this case would, I guess, occur in Virginia, you could be out of unemployment compensation benefits too.
Wow. So much here. Paul, I appreciate your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me again, Rick. It's always a pleasure.
Great talking with you. Our good friend Paul Segunda, professor of law and the director of the Labor and Employment Law Program there at Marquette University. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Should you be fired for, giving the one finger salute, telling someone they're number one, or something you post on social media? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day for history, the year was 1978. That was the day OSHA published its lead standard. The standard reduced the permissible exposure by 75% to protect nearly 1 million workers from damage to nervous, urinary, and reproductive systems. As early as 1908, Alice Hamilton, the mother of occupational medicine, noted that lead had endangered workers as far back as the first half-century after Christ. In their book, Deceit and Denial, The Deadly Politics of Industrial Pollution, historians Gerald Markowitz and David Rosner add that, throughout her distinguished career, Hamilton was deeply involved in uncovering the relationship between lead and disease in the American workforce. Hamilton's groundbreaking research on the effects of lead paved the way for a growing uproar against its continued use. After the Occupational Safety and Health Act passed in 1970, occupational and public health activists pushed hard for a lead standard. A new generation of industrial hygienists emphasized how unsound, industry-driven conclusions regarding safe lead levels impacted women workers and workers of color. Industry had long asserted that women and African Americans were simply more susceptible to lead poison, which served to justify discrimination in hiring. Some unions accepted these terms, if only to demand a stringent lead standard that included immediate implementation of engineering controls. But leading hygienists like Gene Stellman blasted these arguments. Stellman insisted such conclusions reflected racial and gender bias rather than any credible scientific evidence. She added that men, women, and children, regardless of race or ethnicity, were all adversely affected by lead exposure. The final standard adopted was considered a compromise. Discrimination in hiring has continued and enforcement proves difficult. But even a watered-down standard was too much for the lead industry. They have been fighting it ever since.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. China and a coalition of Southeast Asian countries are pledging to mediate their way out of a crisis in the South China Sea. Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte said Tuesday that Beijing had promised to one day adhere to a code of conduct over its behavior in the contested ocean. And yet that code of conduct could take years to negotiate. And countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and the U.S. remain nervous China won't stop developing military bases as negotiations drag on. A political crisis in the African nation of Zimbabwe continues to worsen. At the center of the story is 93-year-old President Robert Mugabe, who's led Zimbabwe since 1980. Last week, Mugabe fired his vice president and his rumored successor, provoking the country's military in the process. On Tuesday, the Associated Press reported seeing tanks heading toward the capital, Harare. That report sparked speculation that the military in Zimbabwe was planning to intervene to stop President Mugabe, but so far no intervention has taken place. And President Trump dined on shark fin soup during his visit to Vietnam over the weekend. That fact has angered conservationists who decry the consumption of shark fin, noting that sharks often have their fins cut off by fishermen before being tossed back into the ocean. But since sharks need fins to swim, the injured animals often die from their injuries. Trump is no stranger to controversy over shark fins. The meat was served at his Atlantic City casino as recently as 2013, and when confronted on the issue, he unapologetically tweeted that he was, quote, just not a fan of sharks. The U.S. Congress passed a law in 2010 regulating the shark fin industry, but kept loopholes in place to allow the delicacy to still be served in the United States. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Fascist, you may be surprised. People all over this world are getting organized to fight. You fascists
Victory! Victory for the 1%! Yes! It's official. The richest 1% of the world now own more than half of the wealth on this planet. 1% of the people own more than all the wealth. According to the Global Wealth Report published today by Credit Suisse, they also point out that the top 1% and 10% of the world's richest saw their wealth decline between 2001 and 2008. But from then on, it's been, well, happy days. Yay. Things are wonderful. And again, you keep coming back to this. How much more does the wealth class need? Especially this week as we're talking about, well, we're talking about huge tax breaks. We're talking about a Congress that's ready to give, just unimaginable wealth away. At a time when we've got infrastructure that needs to be repaired, we've got education that's just completely out of control, we've got college costs that are crazy, We've got health care problems. In fact, Rand Paul is going to put a piece of legislation forward to do away with the individual mandate and ultimately kill the Affordable Care Act so that we can take health care from 30 million people. Wouldn't that be great if we could take all of that money that we're wasting on getting health care for children? Because, by the way, I don't think we've upped the CHIP program yet. So if we can, just kill those kids off, 20, 30 years early, think about the wealth that we could give to the 1%. Then we can have not just 600 billionaires. We could maybe, if, killed off, 40, 50, 500,000 kids, we could maybe get to 700 billionaires. Wouldn't that be fantastic? I know it's absolutely ludicrous even to say something stupid like that, but yet here we are. Here we are. It's all about the power and the wealth of a handful over the rest of us. And what's amazing to me is what that power and wealth has done in ripping us apart. I mean, honestly and truthfully, it's really mind-blowing. Because I look at the picture of the woman flipping off the presidential motorcade. Good on her. I've yet to find anybody who goes, she should have been fired from her job. Her livelihood should have been ripped away from her. And her family should have been hungry. Nobody. And yet we're still bickering. The right is still pushing their anti-union, anti-worker agenda. And they still got us fighting over this stuff while they're walking away rich. Question is, when do we wake up? And again, I know when that is. When there's mass desperation and poverty and, the old labor saying of, when your stomach's empty, your head eventually gets right. Maybe that's what it takes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com if you missed any of today's program. If you've got any thoughts, something I said got under your skin, love to hear it. Also get the podcast at thericksmithshow.com or get the app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
It's coming from the wind. You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people